All right. So thanks everybody for joining. So we will get started today. There are a few things that we wanted to cover, but mostly going to be very informal conversation. We'll talk about what this whole platform ROI is all about, and we'll show you a tool that we have developed, which is being used by a few different clients I have over the around the world actually. So a few people are using it. So it's pretty interesting. So the partners in crime here. I mean, I'm sure those of you from Oracle knows Vikas, and of course from ThoughtWorks, you know Rahib. But so we are the sort of the partners in crime doing this. So just to set the stage for what it is, right? Um, I'm sure if you really look at it from a product company point of view, the kind of things that some of you are doing, or maybe from the point of view of consulting and providing the services point of view, one challenge that you all are seeing probably, as well as I'm seeing this all the time, is like, what's the value in sort of investing in platform? Very simple question, right? I don't want you to sort of answer that, but if you were to think about it, like, what is that? One thing that'll sort of jump out would be like, yeah, maybe it is a qualitative assessment. We have heard a lot of that from a DORA and everything point of view, all the kind of qualitative measurements. Then there is also that quantitative side of things. Now, the question is like, are we emphasizing on one or the other? And if we are emphasizing on a qualitative measure versus qualitative measure, the challenge would be like, hey, how much of it is the actual tangible value? Because qualitative measurement will go a long way in carrying the conversations, but beyond that, the challenge becomes like, what are we really getting from this investment? You're asking for a budget, you're asking for another resource, but what do you really get out of that? I think that part is one of the things that we are trying to address. um, if you look at what industry has done, industry has always tried to index too much on perhaps DORA. DORA is great, but that is probably not the place where you should start from, because that's DORA, as you know, is more of a lagging indicator, meaning like once you actually go through the whole process of building your software and getting productizing it, that's the point in which you are really trying to see that. If you look at things like mttr or even things like deployment frequency and all that, right? So we need to have some leading indicators from an engineering team's point of view. If we are investing in platforms, how is that really helping that engineering team? So I think the question really is, when you are making an investment that is more strategic and more going to be expensive over time, it adds up, and more transformative, right? Can we know that it can transform organizations? So some of the experiences that I've had, I'm sure Rahib and Vikas can also share some of these things, or I would love to hear from all of you. um, it's been like platforms have been that catalyst that can sort of transform everything that um, a typical digital transformation goes through. um, I'm sure you're all using various cloud providers, whether it is AWS or OCI or Google Cloud or whatever that you're using. When you actually go in and provide that service, saying, hey, somebody is actually running on-prem or somebody has a suboptimal implementation, you're going into something that is far more modern and far more efficient. There is that missing layer in between, right? Between what the developers would typically need and what the cloud providers provide. And that becomes that platform. So, with that said, maybe we should just do a quick definition of ROI, and then I would love to pass it on to Rahib and Vikas before we start getting into the specifics of some of the things that we want to talk about. So, the way I would want to define ROI is that it's that model that sort of provides you that quantifiable business value that is generated from platform engineering. And there are a few different axes there, at least to list a few, right? One is improved productivity. You're trying to make sure that your developers are more productive. Speed, obvious one. Reliability, sometimes you don't always think about it, but reliability sort of transcends all these spectrum. And then the last one is that cost efficiency. And so doing all these things relative to the total investment that's needed. So there is no magic here. There is no gotchas here. Very straightforward stuff, right? That's basically what we are talking about here. So that's how I would sort of define the ROI. With that said, pass it on to Rahib. any early thoughts before we start getting into the model and all that?
Yeah, no, thanks, Ajay. Actually, really like the way you defined that. The way I would define ROI, at least in terms of platform engineering, is a financial realization of reduced engineering waste and accelerated value delivery, translated into measurable business impact. Now, based on my experience, this is where the challenges really start to arise. Is often, CTOs and the folks that we work with very closely have to articulate to the business where the value is, why investing in the platform matters, and it's due time we're looking at it systematically, right, and saying actually we should be able to say a little bit more, and let's look at it from the perspective of enabling the technology to be the value generator instead of a cost center type of thing.
Yeah, I think from an ROI perspective, right? I mean, a lot of people look at some things are constant, like engineering costs. It's easy to quantify the opportunity provided by AI. That's okay. I mean, it's still quantifiable, but I think one of the cool things about this particular model is we've also gone ahead and tried to quantify the annual toil loss, like how many engineering hours are wasted in toil, right? And that's sort of like the baseline. You start from there and then you figure out you what's and the cool thing about the model is you're doing a baseline now where you are, and then you sort of project it outwards and then do maybe 3 years later, 5 years later, where we will be, right? And that's really where I think this model shines.
Awesome. So thank you guys. The interest of time. So one of the things that we want to do is I put a link to a paper that we developed, and which is getting a lot of attention in the industry. And I'll just quickly walk through what that high level view of those things are, right? So before we talk about the model, because there's a working model in there, we'll provide the link to that, and feel free to check it out. It's all free, of course, right? But it's all open source. But we will actually talk about the context of it a little bit. So to do that, let me actually go ahead and share that paper. I put the link I put there. Feel free to open it up if you want to. Hopefully you can see the paper here, what I'm
Yeah.
sharing. Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. So in here, the main thing to look at is that if you really look at the context of ROIs, what we have found is that, again, this is from talking to hundreds of, probably even thousands of various clients over the years. This is what we feel like 5 different ROI categorization should be, right? Number one is like attributional, if you think about it, or the DevX ROI, what you see at the top. This is simple thing, right? The question is like, are we making the life better for the engineers? Very simple question. Anybody can understand, but look at it that way. But uh, it's about that friction reduction, right? I mean, I'm sure you're all familiar with the terms of developer friction and cognitive load and all that kind of things. But the idea is that if we are really trying to look at the ROI from a DevX point of view, is that really reducing that friction? Maybe you should take some examples instead of talking in abstract terms, right? I mean, so an example would be like a new person joins your team. So you have your new developer onboarding happening. How much time does it take, really, right? Does it take 3 weeks to do it? How many tickets would it take? Because we all want to talk about in the modern terms, no, a ticket-free world, but we don't live in that. In reality, when I go and talk to many of the clients who are even practicing true platform engineering with self-serve, they still have ticket-based systems. They say, yeah, we can do everything in a non-ticket-based system so far, but the last mile is going to be ticketing, right? So then if you have a platform, if you're looking at the DevX ROI, are we saying that that self-service goes down from 3 weeks to 3 hours? And is it completely self-serve? Are you able to provide a UI or some kind of an interface for a new person joining, or the manager of the new person joining, saying that that person can go in and put in a couple of information, everything just happens, right? So uh, we're going to throw out a few terms. If you're not familiar, just ask. We can have a conversation around it. So this is that idea of golden path templates. And so if you have some of those golden paths that can actually do it, that'll be super interesting. So trying to break it down in a mathematical terms or some kind of simple math. So let's say if you have 40 engineers that you're bringing in, there are still organizations do that, right? Even if you are bringing a full-time engineer or like a contract engineer, so whoever it is, right? So you still need to onboard all of them. If you're bringing in 40 of them and it takes 2 weeks per engineer, so you're really looking at 2 weeks times what, a conservative number, $3,000 per week or something, times 40 weeks, right? I mean, it's 40 engineers. So that turns out to be what, quarter million dollars, right? $240,000. So you don't think about it at that level, right? But that's where that DevX ROI shines. So that's the first one. The second one is what we call as that attributional ROI. So this is a question of like, did the specific capability that you built pay off? I think that is when you're building a platform, that's the first thing you need to think about. Like, I'm building this capability. How much did that pay off, right? And that is, the question of like, some of the questions that you could ask there is like, is there ROI in adopting attributes like AI? Because everybody wants to do AI and we are trying to do things. So what's the real value of doing that, right? So it sort of isolates that value for a specific capability that gets layered into the platform. So I think if you are building some very your platform already has a set of capabilities. So you're building more capabilities into it. Questions like how do you actually sort of layer that into the platform? Um, Again, an example for that would be um, I'm sure all of us have incidents in our systems or like we are dealing with for our clients with that, right? Think about like an AI assisted incidents triage. Pretty much everybody has that. If your incident diagnosis, so your MTTR is about 90 minutes, and if you can reduce that from 90 minutes to 30 minutes, something simple, right? So that means that if you have 200 incidents per year, your engineering cost being $150 per hour, you're talking about saving a couple of $1 million there, right? So those things matter. And that's that attributional ROI that we talk about. Going down the list, the product ROI. So this is where we all have been burned by this, right? I mean, which is why we need to be super careful when you talk about buying tools to solve some of these problems. We say that, oh, this is this great tool. A vendor comes in and tells you this, tells that, hey, this is a great tool, but did the vendor or tool justify its cost? So if you look at this paper, what we have done is we have actually done some research around, the team, my team has done some research around like figuring out what are the kind of major tool ROIs that's out there. So if you really look at this paper, and, like in the references, you can find several different tool ROIs. So you can find uh, what kind of ROIs the tools provide. So this is actually a really well-known model in the industry, as you know. Like somebody's trying to sell you something, says that, hey, you're going to make some money or you're going to save some money by using my tool, right? So there is that aspect of the product ROI there. So this is always good and you should always look at it. But I think what we as an industry make a huge mistake by overemphasizing, over-indexing on that. We're saying that I'm going to buy this tool, I'm going to get something. Why is that? It's because it's very easy for your CFOs, your accounting teams, or people who sign the checks to say that, oh, I invested this much money into it, then can I get something out of it? That's probably the wrong way to look at it, and that leads to a lot of challenges, right? Now, let's look at the last two ones, which is probably simpler ones. So the one is that foundational ROI. So one of our focus here in this model is going to be that idea of foundational ROIs, which is like even a simpler question, like, should you even be having a platform engineering team? Should you even build a platform, right? Is there any value in doing it? So that is sort of that baseline investment before you talk about your product or your DevX or attributes, right? So if a platform team's cost is, again, starting small with a couple of people or something, saying, okay, I'm going to have $1 million loaded cost to do it. Is there a way to, I mean, how is that actually paying back? If I put that $1 million, is that really going to give me an improvement in that onboarding time by 30%? If that goes 3 weeks goes to 2 weeks, so I think those are the kind, and does it cuts incidents and all that. So those things sort of add up, right? So, and we'll get into that and when we talk about the model. The last one there is that strategic ROI. So this is sort of, think of it the highest layer, right? You can do all the things that you want on the platform. The reason why platforms don't become successful in the long run, and I've seen, unfortunately, I have to admit that, I don't know, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I've seen more platforms fail than be successful, right? Um, and one of the reason is like, yeah, you don't really think about investing in platforms and saying that, how is that really improving my business? If
Yeah, exactly.
I can't have that correlation, I've lost the battle, right? Yeah, I think that's so. So jump in, Vikas, Rahib, with
Yeah,
your
I was
thoughts.
just gonna
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
yeah, Ajay, I was really good points there, right? I think this model really helps clarify one that where we fall short usually with these conversations is first failing to understand that this is a nuanced conversation, right? That attribution of value at this level where you're talking about a platform that one has an experience layer that's supposed to facilitate the onboarding of the users in some way. And in other sense, you also have to think about, well, what does my cloud footprint look like? Do I need to be moving from a CapEx to an OpEx model? How does that actually impact my strategic ROI, right? So all those nuances is what I've found leaders struggle with early, right? And they find it as a stumbling block to a point where often it's just avoided, right? It's just that, hey, simply we'll show you how efficient of a cost center we can be so that you will continue to keep the lights on, right? And that's the argument made. I guess the in summary, I'll say it's good that here there's financial clarity, right? By translating elements like toil, flow efficiencies, and adoption deficits into measurable outcomes, right? So you can say actually there's moving of the needle, and there's areas in which we can show that, and we can attribute that to the overall ROI. And that's a much more logical and much more measurable and kind of provable conversation to be had. And more importantly, projectable conversation to be had, right?
Yeah, I think most of these discussions also fall flat mainly, and the platform itself is because it's easy to get product ROI and attributional ROI because vendors are invested in showing you a sort of a number, right, for what they're going to get out of the investment. But I think as practitioners, we have to take it on ourselves, and which is what we've done here, is to show that value in the foundational ROI because going back to Ajay's point of qualitative versus quantitative, right? Intuitively, we know that it's going to help, but we always end up relying on qualitative measures or attributes. So I think it's very important to base our argument on those quantitative measures so that it that value shows up for executives as well and the people signing those checks.
Yeah, and I
Exactly.
think I think while Dora and all the, I mean, even some of the space metrics and everything that we have done, and for those of you from ThoughtWorks, you might have seen some of the work I used to do around PVM or the platform value metrics, and all those things. The whole idea of PVM was that whole fact that, hey, we wanted to actually emphasize a little bit on the quantitative side because there's so much of over-indexing and qualitative. Because developer sentiment wins, we get it, right? We can build the best platforms, but if the developers still don't feel good about it, you're not going to win. So I think
It's the most visible,
most
right?
visible,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
absolutely. But sometimes your investments get really messed up when you are not looking at this part of it. So with that said, I know we got a few minutes into it. Let's actually show you the model and see how this sort of works. So feel free to check this out. This is I can just put the link on the Zoom chat. If you haven't looked at it, definitely check it out. It's a pretty interesting one, at least to play around with it. And the if you're interested in sending PRs and all that, just let us know, and we'll send you the GitHub code and GitHub access and all that. So before I go into those, I just want to set the stage for what happens in here, right? There are four key steps in doing this. Step number one would be the baseline assessment. So this is where you are quantifying the current loss. Because in order for you to show there is a win, you have to first quantify your current loss. So this would be things like your total engineering cost, your annual toil loss, like how much of this time is wasted in toil. Then third one is that AI opportunity. So this is everybody I talk to, I'm sure everybody you all talk to, that's the first thing they want to know today, right? And we look at AI, and we should all look at AI as that accelerator that's actually going to amplify everything that we do, including the crappy stuff that we do, right? AI sort of amplifies the crap, right? So that fourth one being that efficiency gap. Now, what is that? So an example would be I could say 15 developers with 150K salary, maybe fully loaded cost, whatever number is, that turns out to be some number. That's a simple math. Now, with 5 hours per week lost on toil, that sort of now starts adding up, right? And so that think of that like the baseline. So the second one, before we put in the numbers and look at it and all that, so the second thing that we'd be looking at is doing some investment modeling. So there are three cost components, right? What is that you have to put in to get something out of that? So if you're really saying that I'm going to get this some value out of it, what are the three things that you put in? Number one, your salary or the cost of an engineer. That's usually the number one thing, right? How many other platform engineers that you have or people working in that space. Number two is the tooling and licensing. Number three is that implementation effort. Again, I'm sort of simplifying it, but that is sort of that three things that goes into investment modeling. The third one would be your overall benefits quantification. So your quantification, how do we quantify benefits? Again, we all try and look at it from the point of view of time savings, right? And then second thing is the cost reduction, because time savings and cost reduction, sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's different too, because there are some indirect costs associated with it. The third one would be your productivity gain, right? I mean, saying that, hey, I'm able to get things done faster. I can go home and do something, walk my dog or do whatever I need to do, right? I mean, so I think that's the so the fourth one being the risk mitigation. Sometimes these are that becomes some of that intangibles in the whole thing. If you were to do things in a certain way, meaning like if you were to do have some clear NFRs in your platform, you're trying to say that I'm going to make sure that this is secure by default. It has some runtime security built in, if it has some policy as code activities in there. So as a developer, you may not quite see that, but from a compliance point of view, security point of view, or even the reputation of your company point of view, down the road, you're in a much better shape than that. So that is the risk mitigation part of it. So those are the three parts. So the last part in there is like coming up with an ROI formula, right? And again, our formulas, what we have used and all that is, if you look at the code, you can easily find that and play around with it and change it as you see fit within your organizations. Um, but it's very simple. Math itself is not that simple, but you can actually understand it just by looking at the code. But think of it like your ROI is always going to be net value divided by total costs, right? Look at it a percentage. That's what that simple thing. So, and that's sort of the overall four steps that we have in here. And there's also like three axes through which we look at it. So this is also important for you to understand, because this is reality, like what really happens. Number one is your open source foundation. If you are using some kind of bunch of open source components, whether you're doing that from your observability side of things, whether you're doing it from your, some free, even AI models, right? I mean, so you could be using any of that. Or from your front end, you're actually going to use a Backstage OSS as opposed to some licensed version of any of this. It could be any of that. Then number two would be your AI enhanced sort of model, right? So essentially, instead of just OSS, you're using some commercial tools, some OSS, some AI. That's how in reality everybody is, right? Anybody who's doing any meaningful work will have a combination of those two. So we'll be looking at that. The third one is interesting. You might find that as weird. So this is where I'm sort of describing that. So this AI native platform is becoming a thing, right? Whether you believe it or not. So I'll give you an interesting anecdote, right? I mean, so prior to launching my company here and doing this, and I was actually working for another company. I was the CTO of that company, and we had lots of large customers. We will actually go talk to many of them. So I was sitting down with a CTO of a very large, very popular. I'm going to name names. It was a company in the Bay Area who was actually doing some work on trying to improve their engineering productivity. They had Cursor licenses, they had Windsurf licenses, they had Copilot licenses, they had Glean, they had pretty much everything that you can think of, right? Because they're doing well, right? And the so then I was having a conversation with him, and I said, we should be looking at this is all good, but we should be building that platform layer that will actually translate these value in the most appropriate way. His response that I don't know. I think Cursor is my platform, right? And I literally fell off the chair, right? I mean, so like, while people can think of that these kinds of tools replacing their existing platform approaches, that missing piece there is people are thinking that, "Hey, I could go buy this product and do this." No, I can say whatever I want, right? Whoever I am, I'm not going to change their mind. I can give all the data. It's very difficult for me to change their mind. So the question is, how am I actually going to, or how are you all going to actually work with that scenario to see what is realistic? And that is why the whole idea of AI native platforms are. So these are the people who might think that I'm going to replace either 100% of my platform activities or maybe 50% or some number in between as my platform, with AI. So I think that's the reason for modeling it that way. Okay, so let me pause here and have add Rahib or Vikas add anything before
Yeah,
the model.
yeah.
So
I was kind of thinking about this, and I wrote this down. I liked you, describing it as a force multiplier, right? So, and you talked about what that really the implication of that is. I like to use the term jetpack, right? That it's your jetpack. Your AI platform is your jetpack, but it's still that it you still have to have some sort of direction, right? This jetpack, this force multiplier can take you completely in the wrong direction if you're not, strategic in the way you're doing things in the first place. This is where this comes down to, right? Thinking about your platform engineering and the ROI behind it, how much you're going to invest and why you're going to invest around it. So, yeah, I really like the analogy you used there. I thought I'd comment on that.
Yeah, I think one of the things, I think at least you guys have more of a consultation background, and you might have seen a varied approach in terms of how different clients use it. From a large enterprise point of view, right? Within a large enterprise, you're not looking at a single product, right? I mean, there's so many different products within a large enterprise. Each may be done differently. Each may have different leaders who have invested in different things over time. So you actually see a wide gamut of, teams who are doing it right and doing it well from the beginning, and then there are teams who'll think that this is, not important enough because nobody's stepped up and explained to them the quantitative side of things. And there are obviously the one of the things in this model is also that OSF part that Ajay brought up. A lot of teams will start from an OSF, so an open source foundation, and think that they're doing great because all of this is free initially, but it also has that initial friction, right? Because for the initial year or two, you're not actually realizing any benefits because your platform teams are still sort of making it work for
Right.
lack of
Plugging
better.
things in, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think this is where the AI as a jetpack and having, and to Ajay's point, having a platform on top of the AI, right? That's what really matters because AI is, at the end of the day, is just another tool that in your tool set.
Well said.
yeah, great points, guys. So yeah, absolutely. So before we actually have open it up for Q&A, maybe just walk through the actual model, just see how this works, right? So that you guys can play around with it. So as I talked about, first of all, first thing you should be looking at this model is look at it from the point of view of what kind of a projection model are we looking at? Should we be looking at a conservative model, realistic model, optimistic model? So I'll tell you the places to use these, right? So when we developed the first version of it, we did not have a conservative model. We started with a realistic and more optimistic model. But when one of the clients I have started using this internally, the numbers that were coming out of it, sometimes we can't believe our own eyes, right? Some of the numbers that comes up, those numbers were extremely high. So when you see such a large number, you're not going to go tell your leadership that if you invest in platforms, you're going to get 200,000% increase, right? I mean, because they're just going to walk you out of the room, right? I mean, so what you really want is to have that conservative number, which is a great idea, right? So you should always sell short and then say, if it actually exceeds that expectations, that's better. So that's the reason for the conservative one. So let's look at this one. So if you really look at an optimistic way, um, what we are really saying is that these are the base numbers where we set these things, right? We will say your base toil realization is 70%, because he's saying that, yeah, you can improve that your toil by 70% at best. That we are saying. So we're not saying that it's going to completely eliminate it, right? Because nobody can completely eliminate any of these things. But when you look at the conservative side of things, you can see that it's dropped down to 50%. So is 50 the right number? Should it be 40? Who knows, right? I mean, I think this is based on the data that we have. So that's why we have to start somewhere. That's the reason why we have picked that. So if we take realistic 60. So similarly, all these numbers would change based on that. So let's look at the actual configuration. This is probably the core of this whole model. So you start with saying something like, how many people are there in your engineering team? So keep in mind that this is your engineering team, not your you know your producing teams. This is a consuming team, right? So who's consuming the capabilities that you provide? So five is such a small number. We can say, yeah, it's typically 20 or something like that. And I have 20 people who would actually do this. So I have 20 people engineering team. My average engineering salary, again, with these days, with like global workforce and all that kind of things, maybe it is 120,000, whatever. You can actually say whatever that number is. Then you look at it from the point of view of platform team ratio. So if you have 20 engineers you're supporting, how many people are there in your platform team who are actually doing this? That's the part where you're talking about the producer side of things, not the consumer. So come up with something like two, right? I'm just throwing in, again, you can obviously play around within your scenario and see how this works. Now, this is an interesting number, weekly toil number. And this is the number in which you would say, no, and this comes from surveys, developer sentiments and all that, but also by instrumenting your CI/CD, instrumenting your any of the workflows that you have. Uh, you know, if you have your observability platform, maybe it can actually sort of bubble up some of the challenges that you have within your system. So have something that comes up with a reasonable number here. So because this is actually going to amplify a lot of things. So you need to be careful not saying that, oh, out of the 40 hours a week, my developers waste 20 hours, right? It might be true, but if you say that, this model will give you some crazy numbers. So you want to be careful with that. So come up with some reasonable number. Now, there are two attributes directly related to AI that we have in here. One is more along the lines of what's the current AI usage within the team. When I say team, it is mostly the engineering team who's using it. Why is that important? Because that's a way in which you can ensure that you are providing that additional value for what is happening. To Vikas's point earlier, if we have an AI tool, whether it is just cloud code integrated into your VS Code, or have a cursor, whatever you're trying to do. If you have things like that, then your platform team is providing that capabilities by bridging whatever gap it is, right? So that's the reason to actually pull that up. And this is sort of like a well-known, I think there are lots of research coming out in these multipliers, so you can see here. Then this one is more interesting, right? You can have all the tools you want. So going back to my conversation with that CTO, but how ready are your teams? Can they consume it? The average number, the last number I saw from Microsoft on the GitHub Copilot adoption is 45% within an organization. I'm sure some of these Microsoft leaders have put that out there too, right? So if you talk to how you are using some of these things, or to people who are actually using it, you might find that it's all good to have it, but my team itself is not ready to do it. So you need to then think about, like, what do I have to do to make it ready? So that's this multiplier. Now comes the simpler things like, yeah, what's your deployment frequency? Do you actually deploy daily, weekly, monthly kind of thing? Then you have what industry this is. This also makes a huge difference based on what we looked at, because some of those early stage startups will have like a less than one kind of a multiplier, whereas if you're doing this in healthcare, it's much higher. So I think that's the thing. And then technical debt is, of course, you know what that is, but the idea is, bring that into the multiplier. Then look at the analysis period. So how long do you have to show the value? And this would sort of map your overall ROI over time. And when we have done some work in the past, so I was mentioning earlier to Marian, and so I was doing a bunch of work, and when I was at ThoughtWorks, did some research on it. We published some work on it, and at that point, we actually looked at 3 years as a standard period for ROI. In your case, your mileage might vary, right? You might look at it and say, I don't have 3 years in my hands. I have to find some value within in a couple of years. Or maybe you might work for some larger organizations who might have a little bit more of a leeway, right? I mean, so I think you can play around that. So based on that, if you were to do that, I'll come back to the team topologies configuration a little bit later, but based on that, let's look at what's the number it came. This computes it live, so you look at it and see what's the kind of the current uh, like situation here. So essentially, you're saying that your annual productivity loss based on this data that you provided here is about $624,000. So it's for cumulative for all 20 engineers for everything that's happening, and the current productivity is 3.5 million, and then your overall AI productivity opportunity to about 52%. Now, if we were to really look at it across these three different approaches that we spoke about earlier, you can say that if you were to use an AI native platform, there is significant ROI. Thus, you got about 650%. Whereas if you go into a more hybrid model, which is probably what most people are today, you're going to find like a 306%, right? And interestingly, if you say that if you go with an open source model, your actual net value drops. So it's definitely not worth going down the path. That's what it's really saying. Now, if you were to actually change this to more conservative, how does this change? So you can see that, now, yeah, when you go into conservative model, in an AI enhanced hybrid, you see a number that is more reasonable here. And that is the whole beauty of the model, that you can actually figure that part out, right? So let's actually also plug in the team topology side of things. I'm assuming that most
Ajay,
of
do
the
you want to quickly touch upon the net value number itself before you move to team topologies? Like how?
yes, go ahead. I mean, jump in. Why don't you guys jump in? Yeah,
So what does net value here represent? Like, do we want to touch upon that for a
yeah,
bit?
yeah,
Because
absolutely.
how did we come up with that number? That's basically where I'm
Yeah,
going with.
yeah, excellent. Yeah, so absolutely. So I think the net value would be like, how much are you actually going to get out of doing this work, right? Essentially, if you're saying that if your implementation cost is for building this platform capability is about 420 in this particular case, right? Or maybe you should just take this one. Taking a implementation cost is about $450,000, which is a reasonable amount of money that you would, as mid to small, large companies might spend on, when they're starting on the platform journey. And your annual licensing costs is 80K. And then what you're saying is that your benefits out of that, it could be $1.8 million. And you could literally recoup that investment in about 8 months' time.
All right.
And that's the whole idea there. And then there is also other things like, what's your total cost per year? So essentially, like, if you were to do all of these things, right? So this is your total cost, which sort of includes these three vectors that we talked about. So you could come up with this idea that your total benefits in 1 year would be like 1.1 million. So, but you invested some part of it for making it happen, so your net value is that difference between those two. That's the idea there. Anything that you guys want to jump in, Rahim?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, yeah, this is going back to the same point, right? The nuance around how we're articulating the narrative. So what we've found, what I've seen with in our engagements, Ajay, we've been on some of those together, is it's just as much about the ROI narrative as it is about the numbers we can actually project, the quality of the math behind it, what we've learned from the people. So yeah, the point around being able to show a conservative versus an optimistic kind of projection is just the kind of nuance that should be, kind of taken into account, because where you are in your organization, the type of stakeholders you're talking to, the narrative that'll work in your organization could be vastly different, right? But at the end of the day, it should be able to, be numbers that you can apply to these factors and start to say, hey, can I tweak some of these and say my annual costs can be impacted by this much? And if so, how does that impact my time to value realization versus the kind of the net value that I'll generate over the course of the year, right? So yeah, really love this.
Awesome. Okay. So let's talk about one other factor here before we, just have some discussions if required. So, uh, I'm hoping that most of you are familiar with the ideas of team topologies, right? So this is, if you are not, very simple. This is a construct that says, how should your organization be set up for the most ideal or the maximum to maximize any of the investments that you're doing for any platform related activities. So that's is one of the simplest definitions that you can think of in this, right? So there are four team types and three interaction modes within this construct. So if you're not familiar with it, definitely check out teamtopologies.com. So it's based on a book that was written by Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pace, in a very popular book, probably the Bible when it comes to saying that, okay, this is how organizations should be set up. A lot of the work that is happening within this industry across whole, meaning like within the IT industry as a whole, uses team topologies. So primarily there are four uh, team types, meaning like four types of teams that are in a typical engineering organization. Number one is your team that builds your product, right? Which is your what they call as the stream aligned teams. These are the teams that actually build the actual capabilities. Number two is those platform engineering teams, so the team that actually provides the capability for the platform. Simple, right? Then there are two additional team types. One is called um, the enabling teams. That team that provide you any kind of enablement or opportunities to ensure that this is how your the capabilities that's built by the platform team, any of these teams are adopted by the stream-aligned teams. And the fourth construct is called, a fourth type of team is called complicated subsystem teams. So these teams are the teams that, for example, if you're building a product and there's like some common features that are really tough to implement, you don't really need to repeat that. It's not typically a platform team. So you might actually take that off, abstract that out and say that. So those are the four team types. Then on top of it, you also have this different types of collaboration that interactions that happen between the different teams, right? So one is this like direct collaboration, the other one is like provide something as a service. So I think that and then you sort of facilitate those things. So those are the three different ways in which you actually sort of make those things happen. So again, I'm not going to bore you too much with the ideas of team topologies, but feel free to check it out. But if you were to apply that idea, saying that, hey, this is how I'm actually going to make sure that my organization is set up to be able to do this, you can actually say, select that configuration here. So you can just come in and say that I'm a pretty rudimentary organization. I don't have any team topologies adoption, right? I would say that, okay, I'm not able to, so, compared to evolved, you can, so where your, toil get reduced by 69%. If I say I'm not there, my toil realization is going to be much smaller. The other one is like your interaction mode, right? I mean, so if I have very unclear interaction modes, yeah, it drops further, right? Then your enabling teams. So sometimes in reality, what happens is that you should have like less number of enabling teams, right? But let's say if you have like two enabling teams, yeah, so that sort of helps in some cases. And your complicated subsystem teams should be less because you don't want to have too many of those things. That makes it difficult. But let's say I have two, right? I mean, so basically, if we apply some of those reality of what is happening in an organization, you can see that the productivity drops further. So now you come in here and look at it that your AI enhanced hybrid also is not giving you value on a 3-year period. So let's see if I could go back and change this to or 1-year period. So let's see if I can see if it'll provide value in 3 years. Aha. Now with 3 years, you can see that the value sort of increased. So now when you're making these investments, you can figure out where should your time to how should your time to value be and what's that return that you're going to get based on your team constructs and the inputs that you're provided to see if this is something that'll win. But if your leadership is asking, said, I don't care, I want to see a value at the end of 6 months, and then all these factors are true there, you can clearly tell them the bad news up front that not going to get that. We can just spin the wheels, but you're not going to see the value unless you actually try and make some of these changes. What are the changes? the way your team is organized, make any of these things change. For example, increase your this readiness to expert, right? Your AI readiness to expert, so you can see there is value coming in. So when you play around with all these factors, you find that you get the true ROI out of it. Anyway, I want to stop there. Any thoughts? Because before we
Yeah.
go
I
into
was going to
questions.
say, Ajay, really good point on the team topologies part, and I agree. For those who are trying to articulate, hey, how can I articulate the narrative of how did this operational model work? How does platform engineering support larger team structures in an enterprise? This is a really good way to ground yourself and ground the conversations. And really, the interesting part, Ajay, if you could go up back to that section with team topologies.
Yep.
Yeah, so the part about enabling teams, right? This, for those who might have read, and if you're going to read this, hopefully is the same aha moment for you, is really it's the enablement teams, right? We think about, typically we think a lot about platform teams, product teams, how they might interact. What sometimes gets lost in the message are the two that are mentioned here specifically, right? How are we actually enabling those product teams and platform teams to engage? And one, how are those complicated subsystems that inevitably need to exist, AI platforms, UI design systems, whatever they might be, right? How are we actually putting people up there to say, hey, there's some interaction improvement that needs to happen so that these teams can move from working really close together to actually relying on APIs and software as a surface model to try and interact with each other and deliver value.
I think one of the other important things that we should probably bring out is the fact that, our model, if you look at the calculator, it shows some great numbers, right? The other things also back up these numbers. For example, the DORA metrics, even though they're more, indexing and qualitative in nature, do those back up these numbers, at least in the same direction that we're trending towards? And I think the answer is yes. But,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where you need to have that combination of these things, right? Because um, what we are talking about are more of those leading activities here. So as you're really looking at some of those leading metrics, can we actually map it into yeah, the overall things that overall metrics that the organizations look at, right? So I think that's a good.
And
Any
one
questions?
important
Yeah,
point.
sorry, wait. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that. So one of the important points, at least, and this is explained in the white paper as well, is this looks at a point in time calculation, right? So it's so useful because at this point in time, this is what it looks like. But you could do the same, repeat the same calculation a year later and see where you stand, and whether you've derived the same value that we promised at the beginning of the journey. So that's I think a really important point. A lot of models sort of don't look at that. Once they extrapolate the results, then you're like, you're on your own.
That's an excellent point, right? And I think this sort of keeps you honest, right? I mean, you can't just make up stuff and then say, "Yeah, I'm this." Then I did all this, and now I don't know what I told you 6 months back or a year back. No, it's all there for you, right? So, yeah. Any questions or any other thoughts from anybody?
Hey Ajay.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hey, Nitish.
Um, so I think the calculator is excellent, especially because what's seen as, invisible infrastructure work has, measurable business impact, and we can see the numbers here. I mean, having said that, like in your experience, what's the hardest part in getting multiple teams to adopt a single platform? Because each team is working on, different sets of frameworks. And, again, what differentiates a successful adoption from like resistance?
Yeah. So I think this is actually a really, really good question, right? And I'll do two things. I'll tell you like some of the patterns and how to solve it, and I'll also share some resources that actually talks about it. I did like a really detailed presentation on this, a few months back. So ultimately, look at it from the point of view of, if there are multiple resistance patterns if you think about it. Number one would be more like, hey, this was not invented. The NIMBY syndrome, right? You have like, I didn't do it. I don't want to use it. Like, I don't know what you guys are saying, right? Number two would be like, okay, so this is all great, but can you actually tell me what's in it for me, right? I mean, again, I don't know. I mean, I think this looks great, but I've always been doing things one way. Now, why should you actually change? Why should I change it? Is there any real value for me as a developer to say that, right? So that is there. So as you look through that, you find that there are multiple patterns of issues that you might want to really figure out, like where those challenges are. Based on that, you can actually say, number one, is this a greenfield or a brownfield issue? If you start looking at it, you would find that you'll have significant success in getting adoptions for greenfield activities, meaning like some starting completely new, right? Because every organization has got this legacy code they're doing, and the people have been doing things for a while, and then you have a bunch of new stuff that is coming up. New stuff coming up, everybody's, yeah, let's use it. No, this is good, right? But then the next challenge would be like, okay, that's great, but what is the way in which I can actually ensure that um, the new investment that I'm doing is going to pay off, right? So I think there are various aspects here. So I would strongly urge you to take a look at this video that I did, that sort of goes into it. It's like it goes into like 8 different or 7 or 8 different resistance patterns and how to actually overcome that. But ultimately, the rule of thumb is that if you apply some of the team topologies and the one I just talked about, apply that in there, that'll help a lot. Making sure that when you talk to the engineers who are going to consume it and build that relationship with them, that'll help a lot from an adoption point of view. And some of you have the official title of maybe product managers too. I mean, so that role is super critical, right? That platform product management role is super critical because they are the glue between what you develop as a platform and how to make it adopt. So ultimately, that human element comes into it. You can create the best platform in the world, not going to help unless that human element comes to the fore.
Yeah, well said, Ajay. And speaking from the product management experience, especially in this world, right? I think if I had to take just one thing, if I could remember just one thing, I think you said it the best, right? What's in it for me? That if you can articulate that from all parties involved, team topologies is a good way to look at it. That's one way to differentiate. That's one way to look at it. But ultimately there's two others, right? There's two other things that are really key here in identifying what a paved path looks like. So identifying what perhaps the 80% of utilization, adoption, what does that look like? Is that a certain geography? Is that a certain set of capabilities or offerings that the platform is giving? It could be several different things that it's important to kind of look at that on a case-by-case basis from a qualitative and a quantitative perspective. The other thing is the flexibility around flexibility versus governance, right? Is okay, you have a paved path, but if I want to do my own thing, how can I do my own thing? So the philosophy being, hey, the common things should be easy to do through a platform, and the uncommon things should still be doable, should be achievable and some way attainable, right? If the business is needing that. So yeah, these three things around the 80% identifying what the paved path looks like, making sure that the value proposition is right all across the board, and again, having a nuanced approach to governance, hub and spoke type of thing versus flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, the flexibility is also very nice. That's sort of that corollary of what Rahib was talking about, that 80%, right? So when you have 80% golden paths, having that 20% um, escape hatches, right? Ensuring that you're not constraining your top engineers to be able to do things. That is so important, right? Because if you don't do that, because you know that 20% has oversized voice in a room, right? They are the people who are the loudest and everybody listens to them. So if you constrain them too much, you're screwed. And for those of you who have worked with me, you probably know that we all have been burned with this in the past, right? We have never really, when we forgot that, we have failed because of that. I think making sure that you get the right balance is very important.
Thank you, Ajay, Rahib. I mean, a follow-up question, especially with, the evolution of AI. How should, teams design an AI platform given, how quickly models evolve, so that they don't become like obsolete in a year or
Yeah, this is an amazing question, right? I mean, and I've been addressing this in so many different ways in the recent times, but the principles don't quite change. So I'll tell you what I mean by that. So as you know, there are like maybe what 7 key principles of platform product thinking, right? I mean, so we all heard of those things like you measure your value, make sure that you are uh, emphasizing more on buy versus build. If you don't have to build something, don't build it, right? So all those kinds of things. In there is one thing that is very, very important, which is like this idea of composability and replaceability. When you design your best platforms, you build it in a manner that is most composable, right? You don't really make sure that your some of the tools that you're using are so embedded in your system, it's so difficult for you to pull it out, right? Any of us who have architected any kind of system like that, we know that we have been talking about since the late 60s, right? I mean, it's like the whole idea of loose coupling and tight cohesion kind of thing. So that is the same principle here when it comes to AI too. When you're bringing in the AI tools or some of the processes, make sure that it's loosely coupled, it is composable and replaceable, so that if you have a model today, don't really overemphasize on that model. Make sure that you build you architect your system in a manner that is far more easier to replace, pull it out, throw it out without really impacting the users. I think that's number one principle I would say we'd focus on. And as you can see, that is the same thing that we've been talking about for 50, 60 years now, right? When it comes to how software should be architected. So if anything, so I'm actually teaching some courses on software architecture and in the platform engineering space. And one of the things that we are seeing there is that a lot more people are now interested in architecting the platforms as opposed to saying, I'm going to do some automation and get away with it. Because people who can do automation may not quite understand all the aspects, or at least they may not think about all the architectural aspects. Now with AI, it's time for us to take a step back and really think about architecture and look at the value of that. So anytime you hear this news about AI replacing these engineers because all this I can vibe code stuff, you know, you're missing the point, right? The point is about how do you architect a better system to do it, and this is one principle out of those 7, platform product principles is the way to do it.
Yeah, and maybe one complementary thing I'll say, and I'll keep it short, is design for interactions. Don't design the tools to be something. Design to, and it goes right back to everything Ajay said. It comes to the fundamentals of what enables scalable, composable variances and interactions that your business needs. So design for interactions and make sure that the tooling is a kind of an answer and an accelerator to your people and your processes, because those aren't going away, right? Those still need to be intact.
Awesome. I know we are at the top of the hour. I need to drop off. I'm sure you all have, but so thank you so much for joining. I'll send the recordings out. But if you have any questions, reach out to any of us. Again, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.